everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I am sitting with
Nicholas. I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
And Chris, editor and occasional writer for the Dreamer's Edge as well.
And I am Dimitri, webmaster of the Dreamer's Edge and obviously contributor to it as well. And today it's time to talk about the 80s.
What goes around comes around.
It was pretty much headed that way. We're still doing our best and worst of the 80s. This episode is the best of the 80s. There's only three of us, so instead of just bringing up our top three, we're going to do our top four.
I've got a short list of 25 movies here.
All right.
No, but it's funny because when I started, just obviously just to situate ourselves, you know what I mean? Like I'm 36, so I remember the 80s, but at the same time it was kind of, your brain was still forming. It was also the period where, the video store was kind of coming into its own. So you'd walk in, you realize, oh my God, there's so many movies out there. So there's a lot of those like straight to video movies. That was just like that really did kind of like populate, the basements of my childhood. Is what it comes down to. Like the Seven, Police Academies, all these just ridiculous movies, But then when you go back, you start looking at the movies, like there are actually a lot of real classics, you know what I mean? Like Raiders of the Lost Ark, maybe no one will choose it, but it's just like, it's a foregone conclusion. You know what I mean? Like, so I was like, okay, what are these other movies that I still have gone back to or have kind of a little bit different on a genre level? Okay, so Nick, you're going to jump in?
Sure. My number 4 is Tron. I think it's a great movie. It looks really good, which is why I really like it. The story is not bad. Okay, it's mostly the feature and special effect, but the story is actually pretty enjoyable, and it really has a unique look, which is why I like it. It's something that you don't see anywhere else.
Yeah, and about the story, it's a weird thing with Tron where it's really not plot oriented or character oriented. Like it's neither. It's sort of like more dream oriented. It's all about the world building and sort of creating the possibilities of a digital universe, which let alone not being able to do it physically in terms of technology, but we never even had conceived at the time of an imaginary world in a computer.
It's a movie that I've seen a couple times. It was one of those, I don't know if you guys remember Sunday nights, like around 6 or 7 o'clock, there'd always be like the Disney,
right?
Sometimes they do a live action movie, that was always kind of like, oh no, it's Davy Crockett, or it'd be, or there's like the cartoon, and kind of cool. But sometimes they do an actual movie, and I remember watching Tron, a couple times, I think, at least within that time frame. And when I think back to it, it seemed like such a strange movie, and I kept wondering, like, is it because they edited it for television or something? Because it just, like, it was a little bit choppy, strange things, like you said. It's very dreamlike in a way. And I watched it again recently when they just had the reboot to the series, and I went back to watch the original, which was hard enough to track down, strangely, but it was just as weird as I remember. But it really was beautiful. It held up. It was an interesting movie. You know what I mean? Like in terms of the style and everything, it was well ahead of its time.
We talked a lot about like it being influential to make it on this list, and Tron certainly was. The number of things that came out of Tron, like the reboot TV series, comes to mind right away. And, I don't think you'd have The Matrix without Tron,
No, just that conceit of the characters within the game, was certainly new and novel, and, we've seen it a lot of times since then, so, yeah.
Indeed. Oh, you guys had more to talk about Tron than me. That's awesome.
So what's your next, your number 3 pick for best movie of the 80s, Nick?
Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan.
Oh, that's a nice pick.
Basically saved the Star Trek franchise.
Did Frank email you before? that's like a proxy pick.
It's a very fun movie to watch. It's basically Kirk versus Khan, which he marooned on the planet in like the series. It deals with Kirk also having never faced a no-win scenario, and at the end of the movie he has to deal with it.
In a beautiful way, actually, because it plays, into his relationships instead of playing into his captainship.
Exactly. Like you said at the beginning, the no-win scenario is like facing Romulans that are attacking him, and that's totally not what happens at the end there. Either you expect it because of what everything happens in the movie, but that's not what it is at all. Mm-hmm. And the special effects were pretty good for the time. They were better than the first one. And stuff happens as opposed to the first one. So it's a very good movie.
Yeah, I agree. It's very much about Spock as well. I find this movie. It's,
Yes.
It's one of those things where the entire plot is driven by Kirk, and Spock is just sort of in the background, being the wise old counsel. And about a third into the movie, suddenly he just sort of takes over the narrative.
Mm. Yeah, I haven't seen it for years, but it's by far my favorite of the Star Trek movies, for sure. Yeah, good choice.
So disappointed when I learned that Ricardo Montalban's chest place was completely fake, and that was not his real body. It's like, wow, that guy buffed up for this movie. Nope, no, he didn't.
You know what really disappointed me about that movie, though?
What?
Because that movie set up Kirstie Alley as, the new Vulcan officer on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And they never went anywhere with that.
Well, they didn't get her for the next one, so...
I forgot she was in it completely, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and your number 2 pick, then.
Number 2, Back to the Future.
That was one of my runner-ups.
Yeah. It is first movie I saw in the theaters with my father. It's great. I saw it. I really loved it the first time, but it's the kind of movie that you watch over and over again, and you catch more and more details, more and more subtle jokes that you didn't catch the first time, and you appreciate it more and more every time you watch it. It's really fun. And they didn't try to go overboard with the special effects, it's just learn to go back to time. It's very effective. Just 2 lines of fire on the ground. It's like, wow, this is cool. This is perfect. They don't need any more. And that's why it still holds up to this day.
Yeah, so I watched it again last year, just kind of doing the whole 25-year anniversary thing. And there are a lot of really bad time travel movies. Is all I have to say. But this one doesn't get too complicated. Certainly it does get a little bit more messy with the later movies in the series, for sure.
Yeah.
But that first one has its conceit and keeps with it. And like you said, the special effects work. I really, really liked it. And it introduced, America beyond, the family ties, to... And, it paved the way to Teen Wolf, so...
Yes, we should all be grateful for that. How else would we have discovered Jason Bateman than through Teen Wolf 2? But the thing is, the reason why it's so elegant in its time travel is I think is because, for the most part, Back to the Future isn't really a time travel movie. For the most part, it's a discover your parents movie. It's sort of a coming of age, discover that your parents are people to sort of narrative, which is achieved by way of time travel.
Yeah,
but
true.
it's sort of the focus is more on the almost sitcom dynamics.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so what is your number 1 pick for
Number 1?
best movie of the 80s?
That's probably first pick of many people out there. The Empire Strikes Back, which many people find surprising because have a Star Trek and a Star Wars movie in the list, and usually people are not supposed to be fans of both the two, but I break the rule.
I know. As a small aside before you get into the movie, you and I both went to Las Vegas together and sort of came across a Star Trek wedding at the Hilton.
Yeah.
And it was hilarious because right next to the Star Trek wedding, which was on the Star Trek part of the hotel, was a sort of casino that was Star Wars themed. And you could see the guests sort of looking over there going like, I can't go in there. I want to, but I can't.
Yeah, there's a rule. You pick one, and that's it. But going to the movie, now people think of Star Wars, they think of special effects and computer and stuff like that. It was totally not about that. It was about the characters that you had met in the first movies and their story basically evolving. And you see what happens to them as they keep fighting the Empire. And the action is great. You have a lot of suspense, what's happening. The ending kind of hits you, and you're like, wow, that's how they're ending it, and you have to see the next one.
Which wasn't the norm back then.
Really?
Compared to now, where it's sort of like...
where they film the two back to back, and you basically wait till the next year. But it's true.
It's a great movie. I would watch it anytime it's on TV. It's like I'm doing something, I catch it. Oh, okay, I'm watching this now.
Yeah, it's by far the best in the series. Whether you include the new as part of the series, but certainly that first trilogy. It's my favorite, and I think not very many people would disagree. But it's a great movie. Han Solo is just perfect.
He sort of takes over the movie as well, because the first one is totally about Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, exactly.
This one's about Han Solo all the way.
Yeah.
No, good choice. And just the whole action on just that ice planet. the way it gets started and everything. It's just they're losing. It's what it comes down to. The Empire is striking back.
Yeah, I often comment that I don't like to be continued movies, and every time I mention this, people sort of like, but you like Empire Strikes Back, doesn't that make you kind of a hypocrite? And first of all, yes. And second, to a certain degree, I find that's different because the movie does what it says on the can. It says the Empire Strikes Back, and by the end of the movie, the Empire has struck back,
Yeah. It's kicked you in the stomach, showing you who's boss, and,
Yeah.
And you want to see what happens, especially after the way the first one finishes with like the rah, everyone's getting their medals, and, they've all, become warriors, and you realize, well, that's not enough, you're outnumbered.
Yeah.
So.
And it's funny because it's Lucas, that Spielberg had nothing to do with it, but I find back when you look at Lucas' work back in those days, you can see a lot more of where Spielberg and Lucas sort of met creatively. They're more concerned with the way narrative works, because the Great Hoth thing, it starts with Luke Skywalker doing his own thing, and since he's a hero, you figure he's going to be the hero, then he, screws up, and Han Solo has to be the hero and save him. And from that point on, Han Solo is the hero, and I like that the movie actually takes the time to give you that shift in the narrative, which you don't see anymore. Like, if you look at the Star Wars prequels, it's sort of like, well, Qui-Gon was the hero, now it's Anakin, he's older. Whatever. Hey, do you want to go next, Chris?
The first one I'll choose is, this is Spinal Tap.
Oh,
1984's Rob Reiner movie, which is just, it's a great little spoof of the, kind of like a rock band, and it's done in mockumentary style, which has become its own genre as well, with the Ruddles and all these other movies that have kind of gone through time, and, the A Mighty Wind nowadays, and Best in Show and everything. So it's a genre, and I don't know if it started here, you know what I mean, but it takes the tropes of the documentary and the rock document, biopic, and kind of really plays with them quite cleverly, and it's a great film. If you haven't watched it, it's just got some great lines in it.
And apparently it's actually pretty accurate, because I remember watching all of the 80s, and, like, rock stars talking about that movie, and it's like, yeah, this hit way too close to home. And it's like, getting lost on the way to the stage, yeah, that happened to us, and they're like listing things in the movie that had happened to them, and it's like, I don't know who wrote this thing, but it's like, he had insider information on this.
Yeah, well, just like the ludicrousness of just being on a tour, you know what I mean? Like, like going from city to city, not sure where you're going to wake up, traveling in a bus, like, with these people who aren't really your family, but you're spending too much time with, it's, and they play with that a lot, and it's a good one.
I think it's one of those early movies that played with, to a certain degree, geek culture. There's a lot of jokes that you have to be a music geek to get.
Yeah.
Like the idea of the imminently replaceable drummer is something.
Def Leppard, anyone? Yeah, exactly. So that one, check it out. And then Nora Ephron passed away, and so I've obviously gone back and with a lot of people and kind of looked at some of her things. And, I have to say, When Harry Met Sally, 1989, again, a Rob Reiner movie, really still stands the test. It's a great little movie. It's got the beats of a classic screwball comedy almost, and it's a really good romantic comedy. Like, romantic comedies can be good if they're written well, and this is one of them, so, I don't think I like Billy Crystal and all that many things, but he plays this, kind of an asshole-ish guy, but they create this believable friendship that basically then they try and apply love onto the top of it, in a way, and it's just like kind of like how there's a risk to that when you finally make that admission, because you might lose the friendship, and they finally do it, and their lives are just kind of like constantly mistimed in terms of them being together, and they finally get together, of course. But it's a really good movie. It's really good.
No, I agree. It was one of my runner-ups. Nora Ephron always had this sort of very old-fashioned style about her, like this sort of very old-fashioned approach to storytelling, which gives it that sort of screwball comedy thing that doesn't really match the romantic comedy formula to a certain degree. It sort of clashes with it. And I love that Rob Reiner sort of went with it.
Yeah.
And didn't try to fight against it and sort of make it fit more into the mold. He just went like, no, that's the strength of that screenplay,
Yeah.
And as a result, I think it almost feels more real, this sort of conflict between the modern and the screwball.
Yeah. One of the iconic lines is when Billy Crystal says to, what's her name? I'm blanking right now.
Meg Ryan?
Meg Ryan, that a man and a woman can't be friends. You know, it's just like you can't. You know, like a man always wants to have sex with the woman, you know, and she's like, no, of course you can be friends, and he's like, no, you can't. You know, it's basically this. And you know, there's been some criticism, like, did this movie kind of like ruin male-female friendships? You know, and I'm like, it's such a ridiculous attempt to try and make an article. You know what I mean? Like, and if you watch the rest of the movie, you know, you would see that they do have a great friendship. You know,
they really do.
And
well, I mean, that's the irony of that line. That's the great part about that line is that he can only say that to his friend.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, to admit that. You know? Yeah. So, no. And now, to continue with the Rob Reiner
wow.
trilogy, because he was everywhere in the 80s, one of my all-time favorites, and I'm sure a lot of other people's, The Princess Bride.
Yes, another runner-up of mine.
Indeed.
Yeah, and this is, if you haven't seen it, it's based on a novel. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but...
William Goldman is the author, by the way.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah. Fred Savage is, 10 years old, he's sick, he's at home from school, his grandfather comes over, he's like, I'll keep you company, I'll read you a book. And the kid's like, what an old, boring book, And the grandfather starts reading, and more, Fred Savage is getting more and more into the story. And it's just like, so you keep having these pauses as they're talking, and then they go back into the story. And the story is just a great play on the fairy tale. And it's got a lot of great characters. Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
Billy Crystal. So, yeah, no, it's a great movie. It's sweet, charming, and a lot of fun.
And incredibly quotable.
Yeah.
This is a movie that, if you go around, anybody from our generation or a little bit older, you go around and you quote a line from Princess Bride, everybody will recognize it, everybody will laugh right away.
Yeah. Especially in video games, online playing games, those lines get quoted all the time, and it's always funny, or they basically make characters that, resemble that, and it's like, wow, okay. It's a great movie.
Just for the heck of it, like, off the top of your heads, what are some of your favorite Princess Bride quotes?
I like obviously, my name is...
Yeah, you've killed my father.
You've killed my father, prepare to die.
That one gets used a lot in games.
And but even that whole exchange of when they're doing the poison back and forth, and was it all Sicilians are liars, and therefore you know that. And it's a great little set piece.
I don't think that word means what you think it means.
Yeah, that was great. I like when they're on the boats and the one says they're catching up to us. Are they using the same winds we are?
Love, sweet love.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like more the child movie, which again, like, easy to kind of ignore, you know what I mean? But there are some good movies made for that, like, all ages, pocket. The other one, the mockumentary. The other one, a romantic comedy. And then for my fourth, which was kind of tough, but I decided to go with The Little Mermaid, to be honest.
Wow! I didn't expect that.
And it's not my favorite movie, but it was the first time Disney went back to animation. It kicked off basically almost a decade of success. Followed with Beauty and the Beast, and all these movies, and opened the door to Pixar. And it was at the point where I think animation had been forgotten. And now, some of the best movies that are coming out are animation, is what it comes down to. So I pick it more just for nostalgia, but when it came out, it was just a great film. It got a lot of attention. A lot of people liked it. I remember going to watch it with my friends in high school. So it's not, all-time favorite, but in terms of when it came out and the timing and what it opened the door into the 90s and the aughts, I go with that one.
Yeah. Cool.
Did not like that movie. It was my cousin's birthday, and he went to see it. It was like all her girlfriends, and I was there too. And like, I remember being bored for 2 hours. It was the worst experience of my life. No, I always thought like going to the movie was like super exciting. I thought the movie was made for good movies, and the one that they played on television were bad movies. That was my thinking. And then after seeing The Little Mermaid, it's like, that doesn't work that way again, I guess.
I don't know. Even as a little boy, I liked it. I didn't love it, though.
No. I didn't love it, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I watched it with my sister again. You know what I mean? And she loved it, so...
But it is, in terms of, again, we talk about influential. You don't get much more influential than The Little Mermaid. They did revive Disney Studio and, made it what it is still today.
Yeah.
I'm not denying it has been very influential. That's just my personal taste.
Oh, yeah.
Ugh.
And it was directed by Rob Reiner. A lot of people don't know that.
Alright, I guess it's my turn. Alright, for my number 4 pick for Best Movie of the 80s, I really wanted something to do with horror. Because the 80s were just so huge with horror and horrible horror sequels. And I thought of going either, Carpenter or Wes Craven. And I hesitated between The Thing and A Nightmare on Elm Street. I had to go with my personal taste, so I'm going with A Nightmare on Elm Street for my number 4 pick. A lot of people will go like, you're insane, The Thing is better. Maybe, but maybe not as influential, though.
Mm-hmm.
Nightmare on Elm Street created the template upon which we still make horror movies today, for better or worse.
Yeah.
And it essentially took the slasher idea and said, like, let's go crazy and warp reality and introduce some fantasy elements in there and sort of build it like a fable. And, I mean, we've reviewed it for the podcast before. Yeah. I find it holds up today incredibly well.
Yeah, no, it's a good choice. I kind of thought you would choose it, actually. That's why I wasn't necessarily a dissenting voice on that podcast, but in terms of influential, I was actually thinking about choosing it as well. But I was hoping that you would kind of go the horror route.
I know, I prefer The Thing, honestly.
You do?
But you think it was more influential because it was better at the box office, or just because the way it's made is easier to emulate?
I think it's the latter. I think it established a formula that's very easy to understand and very easy to structure a story around.
Okay.
Introduce a threat that represents a global sin. Introduce a cast of likable characters but that are vulnerable to that specific sin. Knock them off one by one until one of them learns the lesson. It's a very simple formula.
Okay.
Alright, so my number 3 pick. I decided to go Japanese. I'm turning Japanese.
You know what that actually means, right?
Yes, it means I'm having an orgasm. And you would too if you had watched Akira back when it had come out, because that movie is fantastic.
But Dimitri, Akira came out in 95. What are you talking about?
Came out in the US in 95.
Indeed.
And on video, no less.
Yes.
But the movie was actually made in 1988, and it is some of the crispest, most amazing animation you'll ever see, even today.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is freaking badass. I mean, don't ask me what actually happens at the end. I have no idea, but it's badass.
Have you read the whole manga? How does it compare? Because I've only read a couple of them.
It's much more political.
Okay.
It explores much more the social politics and all of that. And
which you get a sense of in the movie, but not to that extent, I guess.
Exactly. It's sort of more of used as a background.
Yeah, it's really just a story of youthful rebellion more than anything else.
Exactly. And actually, that's what I like about the movie. In terms of adaptation, they sort of nailed what could be achieved in about 2 hours and a half. And didn't foolishly try to adapt the entire series. It's just like, this is what we want to grab from this story. And everything else is going to be backdrop to this, intense melodrama.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it so effective.
I did enjoy seeing the fact that you can have animated movies that were not about like a bunny looking for his mother for 2 hours. That was really shocking to me. Yeah, but like the Little Mermaid, but other animation movies of the time, which was all all fluffy and they were violent cartoons back then, like G.I. Joe, Transformers. But the movies made about those were kind of rare, and you didn't have a lot of movies like that. But then you hit Akira, it's like this is awesome.
This magical place called Japan.
now you learn about it, and that movie really opened the door for other movies from Japan to come over here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even in the context of movies from Japan that were being imported here, I should say, they all tended towards the excessive and the violent and the sort of like, we are not lonely bunnies looking for mothers. Yeah. We are monsters killing the bunny while he looks for the mother. Yeah. And Akira is actually a serious story. It doesn't have adult content. Well, it has adult content in terms of the violence, but it has also adult content in terms of how it challenges you, Yeah. Okay, so my number 2 pick, well, I was going to pick Raiders of the Lost Ark, but you do make a good point that, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark. Of course it's good, whatever. Yeah. So I'm going to go with E.T. instead, 1982. I really wanted to get Spielberg in there, I guess.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And, I don't remember E.T. very well, to be honest, because I only saw it as a kid in the theaters and remember bawling for weeks after I saw it. and remembering every detail of it and thinking it was the most extraordinary thing in the world. And I haven't seen it since.
No, my experience very closely parallels that. Made all the more time stamps in that. But I didn't necessarily go to that many movies with my parents. I would go with my grandparents or my grandmother, essentially, but not very often with my mom and dad. And in this case, I don't know where my sister was, but she doesn't figure in my memory of this event. But we went together, and we stopped at the store first, and they bought me a He-Man and Battle Cat action figure, which was awesome. I was like, what is this amazing, magical day that we're having?
Wow.
And then we went to go to the theater, and we had popcorn, and I just remember hiding under the chair and crying and crying and crying as all my hopes were dashed. And I lost all sense of composure and trusted my parents. And I've never gone to watch it again. I've never seen it again. But it's a powerful film.
You would love it now, though, because it's a lot nicer. They don't have guns anymore. They have walkie-talkies.
Oh, really?
That they cock, basically, because they couldn't change the actor's motion. So I saw no point in changing that. But it's a great movie. It's a good fun movie. So I was a lot older when I saw it, so I didn't cry as much.
It was last year.
But I can see it's a good fun movie, and it doesn't shelter kids from bad things happening. I mean, you think E.T. dies, and kids.
Spoiler alert!
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I'm
think
kidding.
E.T.
Come on,
dies.
it's an 8 movie. Come on, people.
And kids probably just imagine kids crying in the theaters when that happened. I don't think you'd see that in kid movies today, or just this kid the main character for a few minutes, see what happens, and I don't think they'd do that again.
I guess not. No, it's true. I mean, I think the reason why so many kids had the same experience Chris and I had, to a certain degree, is it portrays kids as they are, not as parents see them. They're not cute. They're not. There's a scene that Spielberg removed from the special edition, which is too bad, where the main little boy, who's supposed to be the one you identify with, goes to his sister, "Oh yeah, or you're a penis face," completely out of nowhere. But that's what a little boy does, Like when you watch it, it's like, yeah, that is the sort of thing I would do as a kid.
Yeah.
In terms of just the visual of the alien, I think it was quite clever. You know what I mean? It looked enough like the long-skinned, Close Encounters aliens. But it was different. It had its own thing. It was creepy, but at the same time, you could kind of still cuddle it. It was almost the same height as the kids. The glowing heart, and the extended neck and everything, and the big eyes, and it was really just those eyes that really kind of gave it the personality. So and the special effects worked. You know what I mean? So in terms of on-screen aliens, you know what I mean? It's one of the best, I think.
Ah, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And just as a testament of its power, after all that crying I made, a couple years later they came up with Gremlins. I'm under 10 at this point. And, the commercials just go from the same people who brought you E.T., and then they showed you the little Mogwai. And just from the same people who brought you E.T., for me as a kid, just went I have to see this. I have to see this. My parents drove all the way to the big city, because I lived in the forest essentially when I was a kid, and literally, the town is called something Forest, and and we got all the way to the big city, and there was a big lineup of kids, and we joined there, and then they said, "Well, no, you can't see Gremlins because it's a horror movie." And I spent another 3 weeks bawling my ass out.
Nice.
Alright, so my number one pick for best movie of the 80s. Anybody who's a big fan of the 80s surely must have guessed that one of us at some point was going to bring up John Hughes. So I'm going with The Breakfast Club, 1985. With the Brat Pack.
Yeah.
A bunch of kids from different contexts in the high school, in the high school food chain, I should say, being stuck together in detention and sort of forging bonds that the movie, in a very odd twist, sort of doesn't shy away from the idea that that's temporary. They're going to go back to eating each other after that. It's a very refreshing take and honest take on what teenage should actually felt like. I don't think that's actually how it was, but certainly how it felt like.
Yeah, no, it's a good choice. I haven't actually seen very many of his movies, to be honest. But that's one of the ones that I have seen, and it stuck with me. But I saw it much later. I think I saw it mid-90s by the time, for the first time, and it still felt real in a way. You know what I mean? It was just like, and it didn't feel overly dated. It was a very, almost like a 12 Angry Men's type, like fake setting where everyone's in like one room and, and everyone's personality starts coming out. But it lent itself to it, and told a really good story.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be even dated now. You just have typical 5 personalities that the jock, the crazy guy, the nerd, then I don't know how to describe them all.
The princess,
I guess, and the crazy chick.
Well, today we describe her as the emo goth.
Yeah, the emo goth chick, I guess, would be now. Yeah. And you could totally watch it now, and it's like, yeah, you can still relate to these characters.
You really can. Yeah, it's true, and it plays sort of like almost like in a one-act play, if you to a certain degree. And I mean, in terms of influence, I mean, this is the movie, along with Pretty in Pink, that sort of defined how you make a teen movie.
Mm.
And since then, all teen movies are exactly like that, even the ones with alien killers, The Faculty. But I think the reason why John Hughes was so influential is because he sort of promoted the idea that it's okay to feel awkward. It's, if you look at movies before the 80s, when they address the young, it's a lot about conformity. If you stand out, you're sort of like that potential killer. The jock was the good guy, and his football team, like his good friends, and the little rejected kid is the guy that's gonna become a loser and mess up, and sort of John Hughes just sort of inverted that.
Yeah, well, very much like you said with E.T., it was just, children talking the way children do, and a movie being aimed at not just parents, but also the children. And I think that his movies did the same thing, where it's just like you said, they really do give you that teenage voice, or that sense of the way teenage kids really are. But what I liked, what you were saying in terms of the characters and the personalities and everything, these are types that we would recognize now. That was one of the things I did like about that 21 Jump Street that came out recently, where you've got the Channing Tatum character basically just kind of like looking at the high school, trying to say, oh, those are the jocks, those are this, those are that. And he's just confused. he's like, what's going on? I thought I understood high school. I was cool in high school. Nothing makes sense anymore. So, but there were still the types, but the types all changed and evolved, so.
Yeah, well, that's one of the great conceits about the 21 Jump Street movie, is the idea that, no, the nerd has inherited the earth at this point.
And it was about time.
So I guess that's our picks. So, if you guys want to share your own top movies of the 80s, and I know you guys have plenty. Everybody's got an opinion about the 80s. They even had a VH1 series about that. What was it called?
3 VH1.
3 VH1
I love
series?
the 80s. I love the 80s Part 2, and I love the 80s in 3D.
Wow. Okay, well, I think that says more about VH1's programming than anything else, but just the same. Well, please write us at mail@thedreamersedge.com or post a comment at thedreamersedge.com. Just click on the episode name. Next time, we're going to talk about the worst of the 80s, so stay tuned, and we'll see you till next time.
It really did kind of like populate, the basements of my childhood, is what it comes down to, like the 7 police academies, all these just ridiculous movies. But then when you go back, you start looking at the movies, like there are actually a lot of real classics, you know what I mean? Like Raiders of the Lost Ark, maybe no one will choose it, but it's just like, it's a foregone conclusion. You know what I mean? Like, so I was like, okay, what are these other movies that I still have gone back to, or have kind of a little bit different on a genre level? Okay, so Nick, you're going to jump in?
Sure. My number 4 is Tron. I think it's a great movie. It looks really good, which is why I really like it. The story is not bad. Okay, it's mostly the feature and special effect, but the story is actually pretty enjoyable, and it really has a unique look, which is why I like it. It's something that you don't see anywhere else.
Yeah, and about the story, it's a weird thing with Tron where it's really not plot oriented or character oriented. Like it's neither. It's sort of like more dream oriented. It's all about the world building and sort of creating the possibilities of a digital universe, which let alone not being able to do it physically in terms of technology, but we never even had conceived at the time of an imaginary world in a computer.
It's a movie that I've seen.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I am sitting with
Nicholas. I write video game reviews for thedreamersedge.com.
And Chris, editor and occasional writer for The Dreamer's Edge as well.
And I am Dimitri, webmaster of The Dreamer's Edge, and obviously contributor to it as well. And today it's time to talk about the 80s.
What goes around comes around.
Yeah, it was pretty much headed that way. We're still doing our best and worst of the 80s. This episode is the best of the 80s. There's only 3 of us, so instead of just bringing up our top 3, we're going to do our top 4.
I've got a short list of 25 movies here.
Alright!
No, but it's funny because when I started, just obviously just to situate ourselves, you know what I mean? Like I'm 36, so I remember the 80s, but at the same time it was kind of, your brain was still forming. It was also the period where, the video store was kind of coming into its own, so you'd walk in, you realize, oh my god, there's so many movies out there, so there's a lot of those like straight-to-video movies, that was just like the characters within the game, it was certainly new and novel, and we've seen it a lot of times since then, so yeah.
Indeed. Wow, you guys had more to talk about Tron than me. That's awesome.
So what's your next, your number 3 pick for best movie of the 80s, Nick?
Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan.
Oh, that's a nice pick.
Basically saved the Star Trek franchise.
Did Frank email you before? That's like a proxy pick.
It's a very fun movie to watch. It's basically Kirk versus Khan, which he marooned on the planet in like the series. It deals with Kirk also having never faced a no-win scenario, and at the end of the movie he has to deal with it.
In a beautiful way, actually, because it plays, into his relationships instead of playing into his captainship.
Exactly, like you said at the beginning, the no-win scenario is like facing Romulans that are attacking him, and that's totally not what happens at the end there. Either you expect it because of what everything happens in the movie, but that's not what it is at all. Mm-hmm. And the special effects were pretty good for the time. They were better than the first one, and stuff happens as opposed to the first one. So it's a very good movie.
Yeah, I agree. It's very much about Spock as well, I find this movie. It's one of those things where the entire plot is driven by Kirk, and Spock is just sort of in the background being the wise old counsel, and, about a third into the movie, suddenly he just sort of takes over the narrative.
Mm. Yeah, I haven't seen it for years, but it's by far my favorite of the Star Trek movies, for sure. Yeah, good choice.
So disappointed when I learned that Ricardo Montalban's chest place was completely fake, and that was not his real body. It's like, wow, that guy buffed up for this movie. No, he didn't.
You know what really disappointed me about that movie, though?
What?
Because that movie set up Kirstie Alley as, the new Vulcan officer on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And they never went anywhere with that.
Well, they didn't get her for the next one, so...
I forgot she was in it completely, yeah.
Alright, and your number 2 pick, then.
Number 2, Back to the Future.
That was one of my runner-ups.
Yeah. It is first movie I saw in the theaters with my father. It's great. I saw it. I really loved it the first time, but it's the kind of movie that you watch over and over again, and you catch more and more details, more and more subtle jokes that you didn't catch the first time, and you appreciate it more.
A couple times. It was one of those, I don't know if you guys remember Sunday nights, like around 6 or 7 o'clock, there'd always be like the Disney,
right.
Sometimes they do a live action movie, that was always kind of like, oh no, it's Davy Crockett, or it'd be, or there's like the cartoon, and kind of cool. But sometimes they do an actual movie, and I remember watching Tron, a couple times, I think, at least within that time frame. And when I think back to it, it seemed like such a strange movie, and I kept wondering, like, is it because they edited it for television or something? Because it just, like, it was a little bit choppy, strange things, like you said. It's very dreamlike in a way. And I watched it again recently when they just had the reboot to the series, and I went back to watch the original, which was hard enough to track down, strangely. But It was just as weird as I remember. But it really was beautiful. It held up. You know, it was an interesting movie. You know what I mean? Like in terms of the style and everything, it was well ahead of its time.
We talked a lot about like it being influential to make it on this list, and Tron certainly was. The number of things that came out of Tron, like the reboot TV series, comes to mind right away. And you know, I don't think you'd have The Matrix without Tron. You know,
no, just that conceit of